It's a pleasure to be here in front of this audience. I had the pleasure of traveling to Turkey, your beautiful country, twice in the last 12 months. And I must say, Istanbul has to be one of the most gorgeous places on the face of the planet. So it's a real pleasure to be here and to consider the possibilities of greater collaboration. So good afternoon, and I really appreciate you inviting me to this conference. When I was in Turkey, I was deeply impressed, not only because of the high quality of the teaching and scholarship that I saw at the 4 universities that I visited, but also because of the clear commitment to internationalization. By establishing so many linkages around the world, for sure, but also on the high priority that was placed on innovation. The hands of the Turkish universities seem to me always to be the fastest, the quickest to go up, to express a willingness to experiment with new models of internationalization. The flexibility was prevalent and apparent. Here at the University of Maryland, we pride ourselves in that same spirit, on that same spirit of innovation and entrepreneurship. And for that reason, I've been advocating here closer at home, closer partnerships with Turkish universities. Like most higher education systems around the world, U.S. higher education is investing a lot of energy in internationalization. It is investing more resources in attracting international undergraduate and graduate students. It's striving to send a lot more students abroad. It's developing closer institutional linkages, and it's experimenting with new forms of international education that rely on technology. The brief time that I have with you today, I'd like to argue that internationalization in the United States has undergone significant shifts in priorities and initiatives in general, and that internationalization here at the University of Maryland is undergoing dramatic changes in particular. Allow me, if you will, to give you my quick history of internationalization in the United States. Since the early 20th century, and arguably even before, internationalization, not that the term was even used, focused exclusively on sending a small number of students to Western European cultural capitals with the express aim of making them cosmopolitans capable of moving seamlessly within the circles of upper-class society. We were essentially the great inheritors of the European Grand Tour. Arguably, we became better at it than the British. Our students enrolled in elite liberal arts institutions traveled to London, Paris, Florence, or Rome to round out their cultural development. They would master the institutions of bourgeois culture by visiting museums. They would learn French, Italian, or even the proper way of speaking English. And they would learn the cultural habits of their Western European counterparts. I like to call this version of study abroad the Jacqueline Kennedy School. For those of you who share with me a particular age, maybe we have that, you all have that image of Jackie Kennedy in the State Versailles room with Charles de Gaulle, right, being the great ambassador of the United States, showing us that we, the United States without culture, can have culture too. Of course, as American higher education became more democratic, we began to see a small number of public universities begin to engage other universities through exchange relationships. This started can be traced back all the way back to the 1920s with the University of Delaware. We also witnessed them beginning to offer for some of their upper middle class students a version of the elite liberal arts programs. The goals were the same. I like to say that in contrast to members of the British aristocracy who traveled to Southern European capitals to buy artworks, original artworks, and bring them back to the imperial power, give them to for example, the Victoria and Albert Museum, American students who traveled to the same locations returned with postcards, simulacra of great art, to pin up in their dormitory rooms. The link between democratic access and mass culture was undeniable. Except for the possible reference to the Cold War, which led to the use of internationalization and study abroad for geopolitical advantage, namely to acquire more information about our enemies, study abroad aimed at cosmopolitanism dominated higher education in the United States until, I would argue, somewhere around the dawn of the 21st century. At that point, two things happened. While the economy was hot, while globalization was moving into every corner of the economy, and yet while the gap between the North and the South grew wider, the concept of global citizenship began to circulate through the halls of American academe. This was the beginning of a heyday for international education. People in my field had finally found their day in the sun. We were the topic du jour. We declared everyone needed to study abroad to compete on the global stage. We spoke of global competence instead of intercultural competence. We walked with broad shoulders. And then 9/11 struck, which politicized study abroad like never before since the height of the Cold War. At that point, we began to feel the pressure of sending students to learn about parts of the world we didn't know much about, especially in the Arab world. We also learned that on account of the Iraq War, we needed to improve our reputation around the world, and that meant deploying our students as citizen diplomats. We couldn't just rely on our leaders to do that. They weren't much liked in many places around the world, but so we relied much more on our people. And whether we said it or not, that's what we were thinking. If we send more students abroad, the reputation of the United States will be improved. And then just when we thought we had stabilized a new set of goals for study abroad, the global financial crisis of 2008 struck. Against the backdrop of slashed budgets in higher education, our priorities in international education changed once again dramatically. Our focus on international education changed, but also our general internationalization strategies. Under increased pressure to raise revenue, U.S. institutions began to get more seriously engaged in the game of international undergraduate recruitment. The UK, the United Kingdom, and Australia had mostly dominated this market. We never needed to rely on this kind of revenue from international students because we had a big enough market in the U.S. We had our out-of-state students. And if you know anything about public pricing structures, there's in-state tuition and there's out-of-state tuition. So we would get out-of-state students instead of international students, in contrast to Australia or the UK. But some universities began to see that U.S. higher education was regarded as a very valuable product, particularly in East Asian countries such as China, South Korea, and also in Arabia and the Gulf states. And they realized that they could charge a premium, helping to make up for their shortfalls. Of course, we have also exported our education. Think of NYU, Duke, Johns Hopkins, and Yale, which have developed campuses in the United Arab Emirates, Singapore, and China. And consider the number of universities in the U.S. that have established MA programs abroad. My own university, the University of Maryland, here where we are today, is an example, having established both an MBA and a master's in criminology in China. The reasons are simple. There's a demand, and the demand not only generates revenue, but elevates our brand and international reputation. And as we begin to engage the world, we also begin to see ourselves increasingly in an international context. Up until recently, U.S. universities compared themselves exclusively to other U.S. institutions. We are just beginning to understand that there is a world beyond U.S. News and World Report. To be sure, our domestic ranking is key for us during these challenging economic times when we're all competing for a smaller student applicant pool and trying to raise private money in a more volatile economic climate. But as the rest of the world is catching up to the United States when it comes to the quality and reputation of higher education, when foreign applicants look immediately at rankings, when we need to begin fundraising from international alumni, and when we want to partner with institutions around the globe for educational and research purposes, we have suddenly discovered the Times Higher Education, QS, and Shanghai Jiaotong rankings. We are just beginning to fill out their forms and to consider how we can move up in the rankings a notch or two just by giving these surveys a little bit of attention. And our focus in international education has been shifting too. In the United States, we see more emphasis on establishing strategic partnerships with universities around the globe. Every university in the U.S., like every university around the globe, around the world, has a pile of dust-collecting MOUs, often entered into on account of a personal relationship developed over a cup of coffee at a conference, a meeting abroad, or an international terminal. But making so many friends has left us all spread so thin. Nothing amounts to any deep relationship, and we are now thus endeavoring to establish a more finite set of partnerships with which we can have broader and deeper collaborations. One thing this and the economy has led to is greater interest in undergraduate student exchange. As inheritors of the Grand Tour, U.S. institutions have sent only a fraction of their study abroad students to study at foreign universities through the mechanism of exchange. The majority of our study abroad students travel in groups together. Only 6%, think of that, only 6% of all of our study abroad students in the United States use the vehicle of exchange. That is the exact inverse of what we see in the rest of the world. But that's changing. And why? One, it's cheaper for most public university students. We just charge them in-state tuition for the experience. Most group study abroad experiences that are a semester in duration cost more than twice in-state tuition. It's better for public universities as only on exchange do universities actually retain the tuition dollars. On these other kinds of programs, since it's so expensive, we don't charge them tuition, we charge them the operating costs of participating in the program. It's now being promoted more heavily on account of the deeper relationships between institutions. Indeed, exchange is increasingly seen as a first step to deeper partnership. It's a strategy. It's not just an experience for students, but it opens doors to other kinds of relationships. From exchanging students, we can talk about exchanging faculty, co-tutels, 2+2 degrees, joint institutes, and collaborative research. And there are more and more English language courses as greater student mobility affects the world overall. And perhaps most importantly, exchange brings in international students, globalizing our classrooms at home while also holding out the prospects of recruiting talented graduate students. So that's my brief history of internationalization. I could probably say a lot more, but in the interest of time, let me move on to talk about some of the internationalization initiatives that we at the University of Maryland are developing and beginning to implement. So we, like so many people, so many universities around the world, are reframing our internationalization efforts around the climate and the needs of the 21st century. And we're doing, with the rest of the curriculum, we're doing it internationalization. We're doing internationalization what we're doing with the rest of the curriculum. We're focusing it really much more around professional development. How can we ensure, we ask, that what we are doing provides our students with an advantage, a leg up when they graduate? We're also exploiting here at the University of Maryland our particular advantage, namely our location inside the Beltway, and as the de facto public research university of Washington, D.C. We are fortunate that our president understands the future. I believe most of you heard him yesterday, and has thus made innovation and entrepreneurship and internationalization two of his major academic priorities. We need to prepare innovators and entrepreneurs, and we need to prepare them to lead a globalized world. For President Lowe, a great university must be a globally connected one. For him, we must now talk about an innovation university. So we're particularly focusing on innovation and entrepreneurship and civic engagement. And by civic engagement, I mean the improvement of the global common good. And these two pillars, really, innovation and entrepreneurship and civic engagement, underneath the larger umbrella of professional development, are guiding us as we develop new programs. So let me talk about a few of them. One thing we're doing is we're now, as we enter into more and more exchange relationships, we're actually trying to move that dial from 6%. We're about 7% right now at the University of Maryland. I've only been here a year and a half, don't blame me. We're now trying to move that dial up to about 20%. We want to see 20% of our students actually go on exchange. But we're trying to do that not just we're doing it certainly by entering into more partnerships, but another strategy that we're using is trying to enter into what we're calling intentionally designed student exchange. That is, we're not just entering into exchange relationships, putting out the menu of options to students and say, pick whatever you want to do, go to the destination you want to go to. What we're trying to do with our partners now is to work with them so that their curricula it supplements our own curricula, and vice versa. Our curriculum supplements theirs, so that when students actually go on exchange, they're not just getting an intercultural experience, but they're getting a curriculum that they can't get at their home institution. In other words, it expands our own curriculum, which is what we all need to do in this increasingly complex environment. Some examples of a really great example of one of these intentionally designed exchanges is actually taking place with a Turkish university, Başakşehir University. So we're in discussions with, and is anyone here from Başakşehir to say? Super. So we're in discussions with you, and maybe you know this already, that we will be sending 15 students, hopefully, over the next couple of years, per year. Probably we'll start out a little smaller, and then hopefully get up to 15 students a year, where those students are not only going to study at Başakşehir University, take two or three courses that are regularly taught. It could be Introduction to Turkish, it could be something on the Turkish economy, the history of the Ottoman Empire, whatever it is. But we're also taking advantage of your startup culture, right? The minute you walk in the door of Başakşehir University, you see a startup boot camp, right? You see incubators for startups. And our goal, since we're the innovator, we see ourselves as focusing on innovation and entrepreneurship, is to see if we can provide our students with international startup experience. So our students will hopefully, through your co-op program, be placed in Turkish startup organizations for 15 to 20 hours a week. That's what I mean by starting to get more creative about our exchange relationships. And at the same time, we know this has to be a reciprocal relationship. We're hoping that your students come here and actually are able to acquire the particular skills they need to gain in order to be successful at your English taught university. Another example of this is global classrooms. This is what we mean, all the talk recently, as you know, has been about MOOCs, massive online courses, open courses. The aim of these courses, or MOOCs, is access to education to those who otherwise can't access it, so there's an ethical dimension to it, and to raise the brand of the university, so there's a business dimension as well. The idea is eventually to use this technology to lower the cost of course delivery. We at the university are certainly participating in MOOCs. We have several already, and our numbers are growing, and we're excited about all of them. But we're also piloting within international affairs a different model of online education, one that is fashioned specifically between our university and our international partners. Our goal with these global classrooms, these virtual classrooms, is to mirror the kind of experiences that our students are apt to encounter upon graduation: cross-cultural, virtual, and project-based. And so what we are doing is bringing together our students with those from our partner universities into virtual pedagogical environments, relying on a variety of digital technologies. To be sure, we'll use video, as been used in many one-off cases in the past, but we're not just relying on synchronous technologies, not only because we don't have to, but also because synchronous technologies make it too easy to create teacher-centered classrooms, or at best, to encourage discussion. In international education, the goal has been intercultural communication on grounds that conversation is arguably the best way for students to reach mutual respect, tolerance, and understanding. But for me, and what I'd like to argue to you today, is really the best way for students to really become mutually respectful of each other's cultures and to learn about each other is for them to do things together, not just talk, but do. So our courses are then going to be project-based with mixed teams of students from the University of Maryland and students from our international partners working together on real-world projects. They'll meet regularly face-to-face using Skype or using Cisco telepresence or some other form of video, but they're also going to be meeting each other in the cloud, right? Through Google Hangouts, through Adobe products, etc. And they'll be meeting again on their own time. So they may want to meet Skype with each other on Skype to work on a project, like a common, say, alternative fuel project, but they don't have to meet only in the classroom. They can meet outside the parameters of the typical classroom environment. The final thing we're trying to do, really, with our international partners, our strategic partners, is to develop what we're calling joint research workshops. Now, it's very difficult when you're in my field, and perhaps some of you in international education will feel the same way about this, to get faculty to research together just by dint of the fact that you've established an institutional relationship with some university around the world. They'll tell you, leave us alone. We can find our own partners. We can find our own researchers. We don't need you to be telling us where to do our research. In fact, the best thing you could do for us really is just provide us a pot of travel fund so that we can go to those partners and do what we need to do. I take that. I accept that. I think that's largely true. So I've been thinking, and we've been thinking quite seriously at the University of Maryland about what an international affairs office might do to facilitate research collaborations between institutions that have partnerships. And what we've alighted upon is the idea is that what we might be able to do is not facilitate naturally identified research topics, but perhaps unusual research topics. So we're now experimenting with providing some small amounts of seed funding to enter into what we call these joint research workshops, by which our partner institution and the University of Maryland will send out a joint call for proposals to faculty members, inviting them to submit proposals that are interdisciplinary, that involve multiple faculty members from each institution, and also, and most importantly, multiple academic units, so that they can come together in brainstorming sessions and actually just brainstorm together and alight upon topics that they wouldn't have naturally identified. So that's what we're experimenting right now with. So we also believe that one of the great advantages of these joint research workshops is that they might not just lead to collaborative research projects, but the development of new academic programs, particularly as they involve graduate students. So if we can facilitate through these workshops relationships with one another that will lead to graduate student exchange, then we're hoping that once those graduate students come together, then the faculties will also become ever closer, be brought ever closer together. So in sum then, there seems to be at least one silver lining to the global financial crisis of 2008. It has woken us all up as to the possibilities within international education. The U.S. is learning from the world that its value in international education must be a bit more balanced with workforce development. We are learning that the world is not standing still as far as higher education is concerned, and that we had better see ourselves in a global context. We are learning that discovery, innovation, must be done with global partners to ensure realizing its potential and having the broadest impact. And we are learning that technology should be increasingly mobilized to internationalize our student body. And we are learning finally that partnering with dynamic emerging economies, such as one finds in Turkey, may be one of our greatest keys to innovation. Thank you.